I think you would agree with me that the highest and best good we can do is prevent the disease altogether, right? Like, we don't want to just wait until we are sick and then try to catch ourselves in an impaired state. We want to keep the disease from happening altogether. And that's a whole new paradigm, right? That is not business as usual in the pharmaceutical industry. It's not business as usual from how FDA thinks about drugs. Usually you treat a patient who's sick and you try to make them get better or at least progress slower. Trying to totally prevent a genetic disease is relatively new territory. And so a lot of it is on us to figure out how we do that. And from all the thinking that Sonia and I have done about how we're going to do trials in pre-symptomatic, at-risk people to prevent the disease, there's two sort of lessons that have come out of this. So we are not going to randomize you to the death, right? It's not ethical and it's not numerically possible, right? It's just there's a lot of variability. There's not a huge patient population. There's no way that we're going to say these people are on drug and these people are on placebo, follow them 20 years and say, look who's dead today. That is not the way to do trials in this disease. Instead, what we need is a biomarker readout. So a biomarker is a molecular readout of what's happening in a living human being. And in our case, we think that could be cerebrospinal fluid prion protein. So most of your loved ones probably had a lumbar puncture when they were sick to try to diagnose the disease. So it's a needle into the base of the spine. I've undergone this procedure 9 times. It's not a big deal. It's an outpatient procedure. And then in that spinal fluid, we can measure the amount of prion protein, which is the protein that causes this disease. And we think that if we lower that amount, that will be predictive that a drug is going to be effective. And so we need better understanding of biomarkers in order to do trials in people who are still healthy to be able to tell if the drug did something, because we can't just ask, are they sick? Are they better? Right? So we need a molecular readout. And then the second piece is, one day, if we do have a preventive drug and it gets approved, we're going to want to follow people long term and really say, over the next 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, can we confirm that sure enough, people are living longer with these mutations than they used to, or ideally never getting sick? And so for that, we need a really good understanding of what are the ages at which people get sick dependent on their mutation, and what can we compare to later on to prove that a drug worked? So all of this gives us 3 mandates that I think we're going to hear touched on at some point during the hour today. So first is we need to know who is at risk. And obviously for genetic counseling, for planning our own lives, knowing about our options to have kids, getting our affairs in order. This matters a lot for all of us personally. It also matters for drug development, because you could imagine that in early stage preventive trials, it's a brand new drug. It's going to have risks. We're probably not going to want to expose those risks to somebody who isn't at very high risk of developing the disease. We're going to focus on people who have a very high risk of developing disease in their lifetime. And so we need to know which mutations put you at high risk. And the term in the genetics world for this is penetrance. Penetrance is the lifetime risk that eventually you develop this disease, and it is the thing that you die of. So it doesn't necessarily say anything about what age it might happen, but if we say that something's 80% penetrant, that means 80% of people who have that mutation will eventually develop the disease and pass away from it. The second piece, which is closely related to that, is when are you at risk? So at what age is that disease likely to strike? And so that both feeds into who we treat, right? So we may say that, again, depending on the risk profile of a new drug, do we want to say we think it's reasonable to start at age 40? Is there a drug safe enough that we want to start treating at age 18, even though people usually don't develop this disease that young, and so on? Those are questions we need to answer. And then long term, right? We hope that everybody's going to survive longer than they used to without a drug. And so we need to be able to we need the data to show that, here's what the survival used to look like, and now people are living longer. And then the third piece is what we can measure. So the biomarkers for trials that I told you about. And so both in remarks that I'll give later, as well as Michael and Brian, we're going to talk about research studies that'll focus on each of those pieces. And for the penetrance piece, I want to just give a real quick primer here to frame this up. Not all mutations in this gene are created equal. And we're all here because something very unfair happened to us, right? Like, I think back to Sonia's mom's illness, and it just seemed like this is so rare a thing. How could it be that this really, really unlikely thing happened to us? That was a lot to get over. And then we get tested and the coin flipped the wrong way and Sonia does have the mutation, right? And so none of us are strangers to things being unfair. And the other thing that's unfair is that not all the mutations are equally bad, right? Some of them strike earlier, some of them strike later. And some of them are very high risk and some are only moderate risk. So I would say no matter what mutation you have, it's never quite 100% probability that you will develop the disease because this is an adult onset disease and unfortunately, something could always kill you first. It's not a happy thought. But I don't think it's accurate to say that anything is 100% lifetime risk or 100% penetrant. So the way that we try to figure out whether mutations are penetrant, we look at a bunch of different sources of data. We look at many different families who are affected. Is everybody in the family affected or only some people? Do some people live to old age and not develop it? We can compare how common the mutation is among people who develop the disease versus in the general population, where now we have DNA sequencing data on hundreds of thousands of people. And in some cases, we can follow people over time and ask, do they develop disease by a certain age? So Sonia and a genetic counselor named Jill Goldman wrote a genetic counseling guidance in 2022, which is on the participant portal for the website. That has a table of all the information we know about each mutation. And so if you're going through genetic counseling, that's a good resource to give your counselor. It's something you can look at as well. That'll tell you for each mutation, what do we know as to how highly penetrant it is. I will say that P102L, D178N, and E200K, by the way, it's an amino acid in the protein, a number that tells you the position in the protein, and then amino acid that it's changed to. That's how we denote these mutations. So those mutations, those three that I listed, are thought to be very highly penetrant. Some of them may be 90% lifetime risk. For E200K, we think it's maybe more like 70. Okay. There are other mutations like V210I, where all of the data we've been able to find so far suggests that it's probably more like 10% penetrant. And there are ones that are even lower than that. That may not match your family's individual story, but remember, we in this room are a self-selected group. We're here because something, and probably more than one something terrible, happened to us in our family. And in some cases, there's other families out there who had the same mutation and just didn't have as bad of luck, and they're not in this room. So I'm going to leave it at that for now, and we'll circle back and talk more in a minute.